She's lucky I kept her. That's what my husband said into the microphone, standing under golden chandeliers and in front of hundreds of people at the Chamber of Commerce gala. The room erupted into polite laughter. I didn't. I smiled. My hand rested lightly on the clutch in my lap, and I adjusted my bracelet with the same ease I'd practiced for 40 years. Edward continued speaking, thanking partners and board members, his voice buoyant with pride. He never looked in my direction. I looked out across the ballroom. The people clapping didn't know I'd built his business from our garage, that I typed his first business plan on my father's hand-me-down typewriter while nursing our son. They didn't know I had sold my grandmother's locket to make his first tax payment. But he did. And still, she's lucky I kept her. I suppose that was easier to say than I owe her everything. William Harrington was sitting 3 tables away, a tumbler of bourbon in his hand, his expression unreadable. When Edward finished, William didn't clap. He stood. He walked toward the stage with the calm certainty of a man who never has to ask permission. Something shifted in the air. But I didn't move. I just watched. The same way I'd watched Edward forget my name during an interview once and call me the woman behind the curtain. The same way I'd watched him give credit to his team for ideas I wrote on napkins. Edward spotted William approaching and leaned slightly away from the mic. William didn't stop. He stepped up, took the microphone gently but firmly, and looked out at the room. "You all just heard a man laugh at the woman who kept him standing," he said. The laughter died instantly. My smile didn't. It held. Still. Quiet. He continued. "Margaret Collins is not lucky. She's loyal. She's not the woman he kept. She's the reason this man was ever worth keeping around." I saw Edward's face change. Color drained. Fingers twitched at his sides. And still I sat. I folded my napkin carefully. I looked at my wine glass, then at the stage and back to my lap. William turned slightly toward me and gave a small nod. He wasn't performing. He was correcting a record. The room didn't know what to do. Eyes darted between me, Edward, William. The silence felt heavier than the chandelier. "Let's not mistake arrogance for leadership," William added. "Some partnerships are more than contracts. They are lifelines." And with that, he handed the mic to the MC and stepped down. Edward didn't finish his speech. The host fumbled back into the program while I sat still. I picked up my clutch. I rose. Walked slowly out of the ballroom. My heels didn't click in panic or anger. They whispered. Each step saying, "I heard you. I always hear you." And now so did everyone else. The next morning, the ballroom was already a memory, but the words remained. I could still hear them echo as I stood in my kitchen, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug I had used for years. The house was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that way only a long marriage can make it, where silence is no longer comforting but simply there. Edward had not come home that night. Or if he had, I had not noticed. I did not ask. I took my toast out of the toaster, buttered it carefully, and stared out the window at the bird feeder we had installed last spring. Cardinals came in pairs. They always did. I noticed that now. The dress I had worn to the gala hung on the back of a chair, slightly wrinkled, the navy fabric catching light from the window. I had loved that dress once. It was Edward's favorite color. At least, that was what he told me 20 years ago. I sat at the table and flipped open the small leather notebook I kept near the phone. It held 1,000 little things, grocery lists, reminders, recipes. I turned to a blank page and wrote a single line. 40 years is a long time to be invisible. The pen ink pooled slightly at the period. I closed the notebook. The doorbell rang just after 9. I opened the door to find a delivery man holding a large bouquet of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. There was no note, only a card that read, "You deserved better." No signature. I knew. I placed the flowers in the tall glass vase Edward's mother had given us as a wedding gift. I had almost donated it once, but something had stopped me. That afternoon, Edward returned. He walked into the house as if nothing had happened, loosened his tie, kicked off his shoes. He did not say a word about William, the speech, the silence, or my absence. He only asked if there was anything for dinner. I told him there were leftovers. He reheated them without comment. We sat at the table. He scrolled through his phone. I watched the steam rise from his plate. I did not speak. Not because I was angry, but because I was listening to the sound of what remained between us. It was not partnership. It was not warmth. It was obligation wrapped in routine. That night, he fell asleep in the recliner with the television humming in the background. I turned off the lamp, placed a blanket over his legs, and stood there for a long moment. He had once called me his anchor. Now I was a placeholder. And yet I did not feel broken. I felt something else. Not anger. Not grief. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes not from a single moment, but from the weight of all the small things that came before it. A forgotten birthday. A missed dinner. A thank you said to someone else. In the morning I pulled out the storage bin from under our bed. Inside were files. Contracts I had typed. Receipts I had saved. Letters of recommendation I had written for his interns. I laid them out on the bed like evidence. Not for a court. Not even for him. For me. To remember what was true. That I had not been lucky. I had been loyal. And loyalty, when unnoticed long enough, begins to wilt. Like flowers left in a vase with no water. I stood in the mirror and practiced saying my name. Not his wife. Just me. Margaret. That would be enough. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, tracing soft lines across the floor of our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, my suitcase open but mostly empty. Not because I did not know what to take, but because for the first time in decades I was packing for myself, not for a trip, not for a husband, not for appearances. Just me. In the kitchen, Edward poured himself coffee. He did not ask why my suitcase was out. He had stopped asking a long time ago. His silence had become its own kind of language, one where curiosity was considered weakness and assumptions passed for connection. Wrapped a silk scarf, the one from our honeymoon in Charleston, and placed it carefully in the side pocket. That scarf had once meant something. Now it was fabric. At 10:30 the doorbell rang again. This time it was not flowers. It was William Harrington. He wore no tie, just a navy jacket over a white shirt, open at the collar. He held nothing in his hands. No apology. No agenda. Just presence. I offered coffee. He declined. Instead we sat in the sunroom, where the light hit the ivy in the corner just right this time of day. For a while we said nothing. It was not awkward. It was easy. Finally he spoke. I have known Edward a long time, he said. But I only saw you clearly last night. I nodded. I did not need validation. But I also did not push it away. He glanced at the suitcase by the stairs. Are you going somewhere? I smiled. Eventually. He leaned back, looked at me carefully. I do not want to be presumptuous, Margaret, but if you ever want to consult or just write, I have a position open. I laughed quietly. You are offering me a job? I am offering you respect, he said. And space. And time. You built something that no one gave you credit for. That is not invisible to everyone. I thanked him. We shook hands. There was no promise, no commitment. Just a door left slightly open. When he left, I stood in the doorway a little longer than necessary. The wind was picking up. The branches swayed, brittle leaves breaking free and tumbling to the ground. I understood the feeling. That afternoon, Edward sat in his office, door ajar. I walked past it without pausing. On the hallway wall hung a framed photo from his first store opening. He was shaking hands with the mayor. I was in the background, blurred. That blur had been my role for years. Smiling from the sidelines. Supporting. Sacrificing. Silently. But I was not blurry anymore. I walked into the guest room and opened the closet. Pulled out the boxes labeled Spring and Christmas and found what I needed. My mother's old typewriter. It still worked. I set it up by the window. Paper. Ribbon. Click. The first sentence came easily. This is not a memoir. It is a record. I typed without editing. Without fear. Not to publish. Not to impress. To remember. The sound of the keys filled the room. Solid. Steady. Honest. For the first time in years my story had a voice. And it was mine. By Thursday morning, the rhythm of the house had not changed, but I had. Edward still read the paper at the dining table, circling articles he would never actually discuss. I placed a bowl of fruit in front of him out of habit more than care. He nodded without looking up. It was the kind of marriage where kindness had become muscle memory, not emotion. I no longer felt disappointed. I felt detached. In the late afternoon, I walked into the garage and pulled down a dusty storage bin marked Margaret's files. It had been untouched for years, tucked behind lawn chairs and a broken lamp. I opened it on the garage floor, the concrete cool beneath me. Inside were pieces of me that had not seen light in decades. The first newsletter I had designed for Edward's original team. My handwritten notes from meetings he claimed as solo victories. Thank you cards from clients who had addressed them to both of us before he asked me to stop attending those meetings. I laid them out one by one, like fragments of a person who had almost disappeared. Not bitter. Just quiet. Upstairs the typewriter waited. I returned to it at dusk, the light soft and golden across the keys. My fingers hesitated only once. Then they moved. You can disappear in a marriage long before the marriage ends, I wrote. All it takes is silence in the moments that mattered. The words were not meant to be poetic. They were just true. That evening, Edward asked if I would be attending the quarterly dinner at the country club. I told him no. He asked why. I said, because I have heard all the stories before, and none of them include me. He stared for a moment then shrugged. Suit yourself. He left in his navy blazer, the same one he had worn to the gala. I sat on the porch and watched him drive away. The breeze picked up. Somewhere down the street wind chimes rattled. I thought about how many times I had sat on this porch waiting for him to return. Not tonight. Tonight I sat because the sky was pink and the air was soft and it was mine. I brought the typewriter out onto the small side table, poured myself a glass of iced tea and kept writing. The story that had never been told. Not out of revenge. Not out of grief. Out of necessity. There are women like me in every town. Women who supported and were erased. Women who knew every password, every allergy, every dream, but were never in the credits. I wrote until the sky turned navy, until the page was full. Then I pulled it from the typewriter and folded it carefully. Not to mail. Just to hold. I tucked it into the same leather notebook that used to hold grocery lists. Now it held me. The real me. The one who had stopped waiting to be seen. The one who had already begun to see herself. By Saturday afternoon, the dining table had become my workspace. No tablecloth. Just pages typed, handwritten, clipped from old journals. I moved slowly, deliberately, assembling the pieces of a story no one had asked for but I knew needed to exist. I had just poured a fresh cup of tea when the phone rang. It was Charlotte, my niece. She had seen the video. Someone at the gala had recorded William's speech. It had circulated through business circles, then trickled into social feeds. Aunt Margaret, she said, her voice low and careful, I just want you to know I am proud of you. I thanked her. We had not spoken in months. Not out of conflict, just life drifting people apart. She hesitated. Is it true? What he said. I smiled into the phone. It is true enough. We spoke for a while. About her new job, her dog, her garden. Then she said something I did not expect. If you ever need help putting that story together, I have a friend in publishing. She works with women's narratives. Quiet voices. Stories people think are too ordinary until they read the first sentence. I wrote the number down. Not for now. Just in case. After I hung up, I walked out to the mailbox and retrieved the usual stack, credit card offers, a catalog I never requested, and one pale blue envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Neat. It read. You inspired more than you know. No signature. No ask. Just those words. Folded it and placed it in my notebook with the others. A strange peace settled over me that evening. Edward came home late, smelling faintly of wine and cigar smoke. He asked if I had eaten. I nodded. He did not press further. He rarely did anymore. We watched television, the sound low, the flicker of the screen reflecting in the glass of the picture frames on the mantel. Our wedding photo was still there. I looked at it. Really looked. Two young people smiling under a veil of dreams. We had loved each other once. And then we had performed love for a long time after it had faded. I was not angry about that. Just honest. Before going to bed, I walked back to the sunroom and flipped through the pages I had written. One by one, I slid them into a manila folder and labeled it in ink. Things I will no longer apologize for. It was not dramatic. It was necessary. That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. No dreams. No weight on my chest. Just breath. Calm and even. When morning came, the light through the curtains was soft, almost forgiving. I got up and made coffee. Then I sat down and wrote another page. Not about the past. About what comes next. Monday arrived without announcement. The sky outside was overcast, the kind of gray that neither promised rain nor warmth. I folded a light cardigan over my shoulders and sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam curl from my mug. Edward had already left for the office. He had not said goodbye. I did not take it personally. At this point it would have felt strange if he had. On the counter sat a small stack of envelopes and a brochure that had arrived over the weekend. It was for a writing retreat in Vermont. 4 days in a converted inn, surrounded by other women and words. I ran my fingers over the glossy cover, read the dates twice, and quietly slid it under my notebook. I was not ready yet, but I would be. Around midday I walked down to the local bookstore. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, the familiar scent of paper and coffee grounding me like it always had. A young woman behind the counter glanced up and smiled. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you find something?" I shook my head. "Just looking today." I wandered through the aisles until I reached the section with blank journals. I picked one up. Green linen cover, thick pages, no lines. Felt like a beginning. On my way to the register, I passed a table marked local authors. For a moment I paused. Not from envy, from curiosity. Their books had spines, covers, descriptions. But every story had once lived in someone's drawer. In someone's silence. I paid in cash and walked home slowly, the breeze pushing leaves across the sidewalk in patterns too perfect to be accidental. When I reached the house, Edward's car was already in the driveway. Earlier than usual. Inside, he sat in his office with the door open. Papers surrounded him. He was holding one of my pages. Not the journal. A typed page I had left in the printer tray by accident. I froze for a moment in the hallway, watching his face. He was not angry. He looked confused. Maybe even uncertain. "Did you write this?" he asked without looking up. I stepped into the room. "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if trying to translate a language he once knew but had not spoken in years. "Is it about me?" I tilted my head. "Some of it. Most of it is about me." He did not respond. Just set the page down gently like it might shatter. I picked it up and slid it back into the folder. Neither of us said what we were really thinking. There was too much distance for that now. But he did not stop me. And I no longer needed permission. That evening, I began filling the green linen journal. Not from the beginning. From the middle. From the exact moment I realized I had never truly left the story. I had only stepped out of frame. Now I was back in it. With every sentence, the edges of myself became sharper, clearer. Not rewritten. Just finally written down. The next morning, I watched the sunrise through the window above the kitchen sink. It spilled soft gold over the dishes I had washed by hand, a habit that never left me even when we could afford every machine on the market. Edward was still asleep. The house made no sound but the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle click of my pen as I circled a date in the newspaper, April 14th, the writing retreat in Vermont. 4 days alone, surrounded by women who knew what it meant to put yourself last and call it love. I opened the laptop and typed in the website. There were only 3 spots left. My heart picked up slightly. I stared at the screen for a long minute, then entered my name and card number. When I pressed submit, I felt no guilt. No thrill either. Just a steady sort of certainty, the kind that builds slowly and settles like warm tea in your chest. Later that day, I received a call from William Harrington's office. His assistant asked if I would be available to attend a panel in Boston, Women in Business. The Hidden Architects. I almost laughed at the title, but I agreed. Not because I wanted to speak, but because I had already begun to own the truth. That I had never been just a wife, just a support system, just the woman in the background. I had been the architect behind a man who learned how to stand tall by leaning on someone he never thought would leave. That evening, Edward stood at the top of the stairs as I packed. He looked at the suitcase, then at me. "You are going?" he asked. I nodded. "For 4 days." He shifted his weight, one hand on the banister. Is this about what I said on stage? I zipped the suitcase and stood upright. That was not the beginning. That was just the part you said out loud. He looked at me like he wanted to say something more, but the words did not come. I did not wait for them. I walked past him gently, not as a gesture of victory, but because I had places to be, and explanations were no longer required. In the driveway, I loaded my bag into the back seat and checked the folder I had tucked beneath the passenger seat. Inside were the pages I had typed, the journal I had filled, and one photograph, me at the original ribbon-cutting ceremony, mostly cropped out. I had printed it larger. My face clear. My name written on the back. As I pulled out of the driveway, I did not look back at the porch or the window or the man who once said I was lucky to be kept. I turned left toward the highway, toward the version of myself I had been slowly writing back into the story. The road curved gently along the edge of a lake, the kind that mirrors the sky when the sun is low. I rolled down the window halfway, letting the air move through the car like a reminder. This was real. Not a vacation. Not an escape. A choice. The inn sat on a hill, tucked between trees that were just beginning to bud. Spring was early this year. I parked, checked in, and carried my own bag to the room. No bellhop. No one to carry the weight for me. I liked it that way. The room was simple. Wooden desk, white linens, a small vase of daffodils by the window. I unpacked slowly, placing my journal on the nightstand and the folder of typed pages on the desk. At dinner, the women gathered in the main room. Some wore name tags, others carried notebooks pressed to their chests like shields. There were all kinds: young, retired, divorced, widowed. A woman named Louise sat beside me. She was 72 and had just started writing her first book. It is about regret, she said. But not the kind people expect. I nodded. Those are the ones worth reading. We talked for hours, not about husbands or children, but about words, about silence, about the strange relief that comes when you finally admit you are allowed to want more. The next morning, the first writing session began with a prompt. Tell the truth you were never allowed to say out loud. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the pens began to move. I did not hesitate. My hand found the rhythm before my mind caught up. I wrote about the years I had been edited by someone else's comfort, the way my voice softened itself so his would not sound harsh in contrast. I wrote about how easy it is to be erased when you agree to hold the eraser. At lunch, the instructor, a tall woman with silver hair and the kind of laugh that made you feel brave, asked if I would consider reading one of my pages at the closing session. I said yes, not out of boldness, but because I knew the version of me who had remained quiet for too long would never forgive me if I said no. That night I called Charlotte. She asked how it was going. I told her. It feels like I have stepped into a life I did not know I had permission to imagine. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "It suits you." I looked out the window at the trees, at the stars just beginning to appear. It was not dramatic, not cinematic, just still, just mine. I slept well. No dreams again. Only a sense of having made room for something new. The next day, I placed my printed pages in a clean folder and slid them into my bag. I was not sure what would happen next, but for the first time in years I was not afraid of what came after the final page. On the final morning of the retreat, the air smelled like rain even though the sky held its light. The room where we gathered had been rearranged, chairs forming a soft semicircle, a table with a pitcher of lemon water and a stack of blank name cards for those who wanted to read. I did not hesitate. I took a card and wrote Margaret in thick black ink. No last name. No credentials. Just Margaret. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. The folder in my hand felt less like proof and more like something sacred. I read a page I had written late the previous evening, one that had poured out of me without punctuation at first, just one long breath I had held for years. It was about standing in a room full of people who applauded your absence. It was about the moment you stop asking to be seen and begin seeing yourself instead. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just looked at me. Not with pity. Not even with admiration. With recognition. Later, as we packed up our things and exchanged contact information, Louise hugged me tightly and whispered, "You are going to help more women than you will ever meet." I believed her. Not because I saw myself as brave, but because I finally understood that clarity is contagious. When one woman tells the truth, it opens a door for the next. The drive home was quiet. I did not turn on the radio. I let the silence stretch across the hills and highways like a familiar hand. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same. But I did not. Edward opened the door. He looked surprised, not by my return but by something else. Maybe the way I stood. Maybe the absence of apology in my face. He asked if I had a good time. I said yes. He nodded and stepped aside. I walked in, set my bag down, and went straight to the sunroom. The daffodils in the vase had wilted. I poured them out gently, rinsed the glass, and replaced it with a single fresh bloom from the garden. Then I opened my laptop and sent an email. To Charlotte. To the publishing contact. To William's assistant. Nothing dramatic. Just a short message. The manuscript is complete. I am ready. That evening I sat at the table and ate dinner without distraction. No television. No phone. No performance. Edward ate quietly across from me. For once we were just two people sharing a meal. Not pretending to be anything more. Not needing to. When I cleared the dishes, I looked at the woman in the hallway mirror. I recognized her now. She was not new. She had been waiting. And she was done waiting. She was writing. She was living. She was mine.